I'm really, really happy to have the next three people up on the stage. They're going to bring you some very fresh research, a new paper that's being unveiled here, and we've got to start it off. One of a personal friend, but really smart person who, in my own mind, I think should be the next Mr. Rogers. David Kleeman. Where are you, David? Come here. David, walk us through the mystery of screens.
Wish I'd worn the cardigan today instead of yesterday now. Good morning, I'm David Kleeman. I'm president of the American Center for Children and Media in Chicago, a creative professional development center and executive roundtable for the children's television and digital media industries. We retitled this session a little bit. You'll see in your program it says screen time, how much is too much? But I think what we realized was that really wasn't going to fit. When we saw the presentations that we had today and when we thought about it a little more, it wasn't really going to fit what we were going to do. In part, we have two fascinating pieces of research to hear about and discuss that don't really fit that how much is too much label. And in part because we were a little afraid that the original title was going to obscure what I think will be the main takeaway from this session, that it's really impossible, and more than that, it's really unhelpful to try to discuss how much is too much, divorced from how that time is being spent, both in content and in context, and then talk about what resources are available to help families make their time with screens, with media, well spent. I've been dreaming for quite a while of the day when the first generation of digital natives would have children old enough that media technology would start to become a uniting point between parents and kids and not a generational divide. We'd have families that would get how gaming can be social, active, and beneficial for learning, and think about that presentation that we saw this morning on Games for Change. We'd have parents who are facile enough with the emerging mobile media that they'd create demand for high-quality children's apps and for high-quality ebooks, and they wouldn't just pass back their devices, an expression that suggests that they're using the devices kind of to shut the kids up in the back seat of the car, but they'd pass back and forth the devices. They'd be using them jointly and creating shared experiences. And we'd also have parents who wouldn't want to see the learning possibilities of the technology that their kids are so familiar with at home having to be left at the school door. The two reports that we're going to hear today they're very complementary. They're very much needed perspectives toward that ongoing debate about the appropriate role for children and technology. And I think they leave no question that when it comes to quality children's media, a screen is not a screen is not a screen. So that's how we've retitled this session. The emerging digital families that I noted previously know that you choose both your device and the content on it for different types of storytelling, to evoke different emotional gratifications, to have a solitary or a group experience, to communicate outward or to reflect inward, to play or to study, to create or to consume, and that's just really a superficial starting list. The context matters as well as the content. You'd be hard-pressed to haul your 70-inch flat screen to the dentist, but at the same time, it wouldn't be especially satisfying, nor I think technologically possible, to use Connect with a smartphone. So in this new environment, it's especially important for those of us who create technology and content for children's and family media to have a thorough and thoughtful understanding of what families want, what they expect from, and what they believe about the role of media in their homes and in their lives. We need to be realistic and honest in our marketing claims to families about the potential benefits of our products, no false promises, and we need to be transparent with them about the thinking and research that underlie our work. In my experience, we do our industry far more good, and we do well by doing good, and we avoid a whole lot of trouble when we sell parents on what's gone into our products and let them decide on whether they meet their needs, rather than trying to sell them on what might come out. CES is the perfect venue, I think, for sparking discussion of how hardware innovators and content creators can build the most flexible, thoughtful media environment for sparking family creativity, for sparking family exploration, family creation, and then ensure that families know how and where to find the devices and applications that best suit their needs. First, today we're going to have a presentation from Communispace that finds significant optimism among parents, especially those who are tech-savvy themselves, about how digital media contributes to their children's development and their time together as a family. In presenting that research, we're going to start with Manila Austin, PhD, the Vice President. I don't usually do long bios since it's in your program, but just to give you a little background. Vice President of Research at Communispace Corporation. She leads the research team in building facilitated communities of customers and consumers, and then gathering from those communities insights that add value for clients and inform and lead the marketplace. She's worked as both a consultant and as a researcher with clients in a wide range of industries, and I think you'll see how that comes out in the kinds of questions that they're asking of their audiences. Manila.
Great. Is this on? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so now we press 2, right? I'm really hip with technology, right? There we go. Oops. Oh, great. Okay, so before I get into the findings, I just want to lay a little bit of groundwork about why we did this study. And the premise is called Tech Fast Forward, and there are booklets somewhere in this really enormous conference. My goal for this afternoon is to actually find them and deliver them to this room, so it'll be an interesting a journey, I'm sure, because they were delivered sometime. So hopefully, if you're interested, you can get that. But before I get into too much about the study, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we did it. The premise was, and I think it's, the morning so far is set up perfectly to hopefully make this make sense, but if we can understand kids and parents that are adopting technology at a quicker rate, those that are really the ones that are tech savvy, or what we're calling tech fast forward, that we can understand sort of their values and their behaviors and their attitudes and sort of how they're evolving, that somehow can be used by us, by brands and by companies and by developers to understand where all of us are headed in the future. So that was sort of the groundwork on why we did this. The way we went about exploring this question was really a two-pronged approach. We had a partner in Ogilvy, Chicago. They did a quantitative study where we got 1,200 sort of nationally representative consumers to participate, so parents with children in the household between ages of 3 and 12. And we also tapped in qualitatively to some online communities that Communispace manages to listen in particular to tech-savvy parents and their kids, and we pulled that together into the study that I'm about to share with you. Our main question was to understand this tech fast-forward group. So our first step was to segment everybody, and most of the findings you're going to see have those kind of comparisons involved. So what you'll see is that the tech fast-forward was 19% of the sample altogether. Again, I can answer more specifics about this, and it's in the report, but essentially they were those people that were adopting technology at a faster rate. They were also influencers with technology. A lot of people, when I present this research, say, oh, but that's just a matter of wealth, just the wealthy people are tech fast forward. And they did, in this sample, tech fast forwards did over-index in the highest income bracket, which was 150K or more, but they also over-indexed in the lowest income bracket, which was under 50,000. So it's not necessarily about money. That's something to bear in mind as we look forward, that tech adoption kind of goes beyond that. Okay, so overall, the big finding that we had, sorry, I'm just moving to make this a little more comfortable for myself, thank you, is that a tech future is in fact a really bright future. What we found, and we didn't set out looking for this, but we did measure attitudes and optimism and that sort of thing, and we found that the people that were adopting technology, that our tech fast forward group, were actually more optimistic in general. They were more hopeful about the future, and they were less anxious. They expressed less anxiety about the future. But in spite of all that optimism, and you'll see there's quite a bit of it when we get into the data, technology is a debate, right? I mean, people have strong feelings about it, and there's a lot of questions. Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? Is it helping? Is it hurting? And so what we did is we looked at the secondary research. We sort of looked at the, sort of the cultural surround, and we pulled out some of 8 major debates that were happening around technology, and we framed everything according to those. I'm not going to share all of them with you just for time constraints. So I'm just going to take a couple of them that I think are most germane to the mommy track and kids at play. So to start, we asked a really basic pulse check of our data, which was, is technology harming us or is it helping us? Is it in fact a negative force in our lives? And what you'll see here is that when we break it down, Americans are really overwhelmingly optimistic about technology. So this is a trend throughout the data. people were much more optimistic about technology than we thought based on some of the secondary research we did. And when you look at sort of tech fast forwards here, who are in red, against the rest of the sample, you'll see that, well, what's the big deal? They're really not that different. But when you kind of peek inside that optimism and you let's just look at the top box responses. What you see is that the tech fast forward group consistently is way more optimistic and sort of positive than everybody else. And this is a recurring thing that happens over and over again. And because there was so much optimism, a lot of the insights are based on sort of the matter of degrees within sort of that optimism. And you'll see tech fast forwards are the ones that really come down as being super positive. And when you dig inside that optimism, you get even more detail. So some of the questions we asked were around, how do you see the future, and what role do you see your kids playing? And what you see here is that, here's where you really see the link between those tech fast forward people and sort of an optimistic worldview, and sort of particularly in how they see their kids taking on the world. I don't know if you all can read those, but what the data say are that tech fast forwards were more likely to say that when their kids come to power, the world will be a better place, that it'll be safer, they will lead the way, even a better environment. And I think it's true that like all parents, of course, want their kids and believe that their kids, can be successful, but what we saw here with this particular group that's adopting technology quickly and is tech savvy is that they had a belief in their kids' competence and efficacy to really do that, and we thought that really stood out. Okay, so that's that's kind of like our broadest finding, but when you get into sort of how technology is affecting families and that sort of thing, there's a lot more detail there as well. So, and I think we've heard it a couple times echoed this morning that people worry that, there's too much screen time, that we don't spend enough time face-to-face. Perhaps all the devices we just saw where kids can really engage in video games is somehow taking away from family time. And I think, David, to your point earlier, what we're finding here is that the question we wanted to ask is in fact technology really making people lazy? And is it really kind of taking away from the family interaction? And what you see when you ask is that basically no, it's not. People that are adopting technology, and really all Americans, when you look at it, 72% of parents we talk to believe that technology actually facilitates closer relationships. And again, when we look inside sort of that optimism, we see that 80% of tech fast forwards endorsed the positive side of this debate, right, when we put it to them. And they were much more likely to strongly agree than the rest of the sample. Technology is not just about sort of pacifying a fussy kid or sort of appeasing an angry teenager. It's really about a way for families to connect. In some of our secondary research, we found that 60% of all family time now is technology enabled, is with consumer electronics. So from the Wii to Netflix to streaming on demand to electronic storybooks to all the sort of tablet technology we saw here. That's really, people are seeing it more and more as a way to connect. So the data support that statement. The other attribute we found, which we think is important in terms of parents that are technologically savvy, is that they actually, they're cool, right? They actually want and kind of covet the values and attitudes of younger people, which may or may not surprise you. They see technology as a way to actually keep themselves young at heart, young at spirit, and young, nimble. And even with the motor control that kids have. Parents are also playing video games with their kids. What we heard qualitatively and quantitatively is that parents have similar tastes in media and attitudes on social issues as their kids, for those that are adopting technology. You can imagine, how easy it is to share video content and kind of have that kind of cross-generational migration of ideas and values is happening for this group. They also, as this data show, have a more permissive parenting style. At least it would seem they endorse that. We're more likely to endorse that than other groups, including wanting to be friends with kids as well, and seeing that as the case. So it's not really just about usage. There's something about having technology as a means to keep one young at heart and in touch with their kids, and a willingness and seeing technology as a means to learn alongside with their kids. A lot of people in our communities talked about doing that, and really that it's fostering. So we really see these parents seeing it fostering as opposed to severing a family relationship, which is kind of interesting, because when we asked parents sort of, is this next generation of kids that you're raising going to emphasize family or not? Tech fast forward parents were much more likely to see their kids as continuing the family values that were instilled in them when they were kids, and using technology as a way to do that. So they were actually more hopeful than sort of the parents that were less tech savvy about their kids' ability to instill family values going forward into the future. All right, so is technology making us stupid? One of the big questions, you talk about how it's so easy to just kind of, no one actually creates their own stuff. There's just stuff on the web, and it's all copied and it's forwarded and it's edited. And are we really getting lazier because everything is just right at our fingertips? And I have a lot of friends that are in academia, and they complain about this with plagiarism and higher education and stuff. So there's a real concern that in fact technology is not helping us intellectually, but it's actually hurting us. What we heard from people, and again the tech fast forwards were more positive, is that this is not the case. That people see technology as really empowering learning, and that it's actually improving. And of course, as always, the tech fast forward folks were even more likely to agree with that statement. So they were, when we dig into it, what we see is that they were much more likely to see kids today as smarter than the generations that came before them, and that their brains were better able to handle more screen time than previous generations, and that this is actually a good thing. That more screen time does not mean a mushy brain. It actually is providing some kind of critical life skill. When you think about the kind of job requirements that are going to be out there that we can't even imagine, that it's a core competence, an intellectual competence. And interestingly, they also saw it as a social competence too, which we were a little surprised about, only because with so much the press about cyberbullying, and there's just so many downsides to kind of interacting socially online potentially, but these parents that were embracing technology really saw that their kids were learning something critical in their ability to navigate that social world. There was a story, I was actually talking about this, preparing for this talk. I was getting my nails done yesterday, and the woman who was said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I explained to her. She goes, "Oh, I think that's true." She goes, she's a grandmother, and she said she has a 4-year-old grandchild that she saw recently, but hadn't seen them in a year and a half. And she picked the parents and the kid up at the airport, and the kid ran right to her, embraced her, recognized her immediately, hugged her, and it's because they've been Skyping. The kid, they started when she was 2, and now the child is 4, and because they've been Skyping, they have that connection. And she said that never could have happened with these monthly phone calls. So I think that the fact that a lot of parents that are embracing technology are seeing how their kids are actually being able to do more with it socially as well. I know I talk fast, so there's room for questions, though. So I guess the last debate that I'm going to touch on, and again, there's others in the report which I'll try to find for you before the end of the day, is technology making us vulnerable? And here, is it actually making the world a safer or a more dangerous place? And surprisingly, or not, we thought this would be even more negative than it was. There's still some amount of positivity here, or people being positive, but you can see that the breakdown is much more even-handed than it has been in previous debates. So even among the tech fast forward, only 27% actually think that the world is actually safer. And we thought that of all the stuff that we learned in the study, this is probably the one finding that jumps out the most as having sort of as an unmet need in the marketplace. People are so excited and optimistic about the potential of technology, but but it's scary because it is in terms of privacy and safety issues, and that's really the area where sort of marketers and brands can probably take a lead in making things different and kind of helping people embrace it at an even more quick rate, if they can handle that. So one of the things we did is we tried to understand from our parents that were adopting technology at a more, at a faster rate, what were they doing, and if they thought it was safe, what was making it safe? Because some people really did think that technology could make things safer. And there's a couple things, and this is mostly qualitative, but I'll share it with you anyway in terms of what they said. So a lot of them talked about things called stranger strategies, which is not like an unfamiliar thing, but the way they lurk and kind of follow their kids around on Facebook, the way they are able to track them with geolocation devices and arming them with cell phones and other sorts of things, that they actually felt that if parents are really comfortable with technology, they can use it to keep their kids safe and keep their families safe. So that was something that was really important to bear in mind. So more things along those lines are needed. They were also really good tech-savvy parents. Oh dear, you all right there? Sorry. Tech-savvy parents are really, really, really good at separating their personal and their professional lives using their various devices. And so in order to, and so they help their kids do this as well and keep that. And then finally, one of the things that they do is they teach their kids how to actually design a persona for public consumption on things like Facebook, right? So you actually create an identity that's consumable by peers and teachers and your different facets of your life. And that actually is a way to be social and to take advantage of technology, but do it in such a way that there are boundaries. So is that a red light for me? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm done for now. Thanks.
I think, by the way, what we're going to do is go through both presentations, and then we should have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So let me introduce Carly Shuler, who's a researcher, developer, and author in the children's media and toy industry. She was the inaugural fellow of the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, which she will tell you briefly about. And for them, she researched and authored a number of reports, including D is for Digital and I Learn. Her fellowship has ended, but she's still continuing to work with the center. She's leading many of their industry initiatives with a focus on consumer trends, informal learning, and mobile devices. And she brings to this a background that's included positions at Sesame Workshop and also Spin Master. She wrote in her bio that she tweets, blogs, and speaks, which I thought actually sounded like the next generation of Mattel dolls. It tweets, it blogs, it speaks.
Thanks a lot, David.
Sorry, we're worldwide and follows the magic of what's going on in our industry today. Carly.
Thanks. I also include hair play. So, hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here and see you all. And so I just want to start, before I dive into the results of a really, really new report that we are releasing this afternoon, so I'm so excited to be sharing new data. I want to tell you about something. How many times have you heard in the last few days at CES, I'm going to show you a device that you've never heard before with features that you've never seen? Probably one or two. Well, I am really going to show you something that I promise you have never seen. It's called an iPogo, and I've invited one of my friends to help me share. Okay, let's start.
Yes, my friends,
Take
the
two.
iPogo can do anything.
Anything?
Oh, yeah.
If you want to comb your cat, there's an app for that. If you have to fix a flat, there's an app for that. Need a word that rhymes with gnat, or a place to hang your hat. Got a chimp who likes to chat. There's an app, there's an app, there's an app for that. If your butter needs a pat, there's an app for that. If you need to rat-a-tat-tat,
There's an app for that?
gotta practice singing scat.
Billy-dee-dop-dee-dop-dee-dop.
Wanna meet a boy named Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt. Nice to meet you.
Count to 10 in no time
1,
flat.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
There's an app, there's an app, there's an app for that.
So, obviously, there's so many devices out there, and there are apps for many different things. So what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today is a snapshot of this dynamic children's digital media market with a focus on apps. But let me start by telling you a little bit about the organization that I come from. So in 1969, a woman named Joan Ganz Cooney asked a question: how can emerging media help children learn? She was an independent television producer, and her answer to that question was a television show called Sesame Street. So it's now over 40 years later, and although the mediums that children are consuming are drastically different, the question, how can emerging media help children learn, remains just as relevant, if not more relevant today, as it did when Mrs. Cooney answered that original question. So I work for an organization named in her honor called the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. So we're housed at Sesame Workshop, the creators of Sesame Street, but we are an independent organization, and we really aim to answer this question in a digital age and further the field of children's learning through digital media. So we do that in a number of ways, one of which is release a number of reports that help inform the field. So 2 years ago, I guess almost 3 years ago, we probed something that David referred to called the pass-back effect. And so what happened was we started to notice anecdotally on the subway, on the streets, that kids were using their parents' devices, namely at the time iPhones and iPod Touches and even iPods. And this is actually pretty interesting because kids' devices have always been among parents' devices have always been amongst kids' favorite toys. So if you look at things like a toy vacuum cleaner, a toy phone, that aspirational play pattern has been common for decades. But for the first time, kids were actually playing with the real thing. And so that was really interesting. And again, this was just 2.5 years ago, and there was still, it's hard to believe sitting in this room today, but people were still sort of like, are parents really going to let their kids play with an iPhone? You know, an iPad wasn't even in our vernacular yet. So, you know, people were doubtful of that. So to answer that question and to figure out ourselves at the Cooney Center if we needed to be diving into this market, we published a very small study. It was called iLearn. And what it was we looked at the top 100 selling paid apps in the education section of iTunes, just to see, you know, how many of them targeted kids. And what we found was pretty shocking. We found, this was in 2009, that over 50% of the top paid apps in the education section of iTunes targeted kids. So this was extremely eye-opening to us, and I think to the field, that there was something to come here in terms of kids and apps and tablet devices and mobile phones. And obviously sitting here today, that seemed to be, that premonition has seemed to come true. So it's now 2 years later, and we've updated that original report. So we're releasing iLearn 2 today, this afternoon, as soon as I finish making the final edits. And so it's an analysis of the top selling paid apps in the education section of iTunes. So again, it's really important to note that this is just one slice of the dynamic kids digital media field. You know, of course, there's not only paid apps, there's free apps, and there's in-app purchases, and there's not only educational category, there's games, and then there's certainly not only Apple, there's Android, and then there's Leapfrog, and then there's the Vinci, and you can go on and on and on. And you know, in terms of kids media consumption, there's another thing, maybe you've heard of it, called television. So obviously, this is just one slice of a market, but it's a very important slice, with the iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch topping out kids' holiday wish list this past holiday season. This seemed to be an important one to look at. So we looked at the top-selling apps, and we analyzed them by a number of different factors, including age and price. And I'm just going to get into a few of the results for you right now. Again, this full report will be released later, and we're around to ask questions afterwards. So let me dive in and share some things that are really interesting. So this slide, this is 2009. So in 2009, what we found was 35% of the apps, of the top-selling paid apps, targeted toddler and preschool children. Again, this is all within the education category of iTunes. So if you add all those numbers up, it turned out that over 50% of the apps targeted children of all ages. And the numbers can add up to over 100% because an app could be tagged for more than one age group. So this was shocking to us at the time. Let's look at what's happened in the last 2 years. So the blue bar represents 2011. So as you can see, looking at all the children's categories ranging from toddler, preschool, all the way until high school, the percentage of apps that target children has risen in every single age category, with a corresponding decrease in the percentage of apps that target adults. So if anyone is still questioning whether this is an important and growing market, I think that this can take that question right away. So this is a really interesting finding. And let me take a minute to explain it to you, because I think this is actually one of the most interesting findings that we had. This chart compares the overall sample, which is in the light blue, to the top 25, which is in the green. And so you can see it split out by age group here. And what we see is that toddler preschool is overall the most popular age category, both amongst the overall sample and the top 25 bestsellers, which I think if you're in the marketplace, that's not entirely surprising. For apps and for children's media in general, there has always been a particular prominence of media targeting young children. What's really exciting here is that if you look at the top 25, elementary-aged kids are overrepresented amongst the bestsellers. So what that means is that amongst the bestsellers of the bestsellers, elementary kids are being particularly well served, which is really interesting. One of the most interesting things about this slide is that if you looked at this in our 2009 study, it was toddler and preschool demographic that saw the overrepresentation amongst bestsellers. So if you look at what's happened in the last 2 years, that did seem to be somewhat of a premonition of what was to come, because that group saw the greatest growth. So what I would say about this slide is that if I was a developer, I would be paying very close attention to elementary school kids and the role that these devices may play in their digital media landscape and in their learning. So we also, in addition to age, we also looked at the apps by price. And what we found was extremely interesting. So you've got 2009 on the left and 2011 on the right. And the average price of children's apps has risen from $1.13 in 2009 to $2.14 in 2011. So the average price of children's apps has risen by just over $1, which is a fairly substantive increase when you think about the average price of these apps. I mean, that's a pretty big jump. The price of adult apps has increased as well, but not as significantly. So I think that's something that I hope we talk about after this panel is the business models that are emerging in the app world. And I hope developers aren't just defaulting to the 99-cent price point, because if you create something magical but it's not sustainable, then it's never going to make it into the hands of kids. So we need to wrap our heads around business models and figure out what direction they can take to create a sustainable marketplace. And the fact that the average price of children's apps in the best sellers has risen by over $1 shows that consumers are willing to embrace these different pricing models. So again, looking a little bit at pricing, most children's apps are 99 cents or $1.99. So, what's interesting here is you can see that 36% are 99 cents and 38% are $1.99. So in 2009, 88% of the apps were 99 cents. So that accounts for that increase by over $1. I don't know. Are there a lot of apps out there that are priced significantly higher and parents aren't buying them, or are there not many apps that are priced higher? That's something that this analysis can't tell us. But again, there needs to be ongoing conversation around business models. And, because of the marketplace, this will all fall out. But it looks like people who are pricing their apps a little bit higher, and isn't it funny that $1.99 is higher, seem to be succeeding. So we also looked at school usage. So we tagged the apps for whether they mentioned any sort of institutional or school usage in their app description. And what we found was interesting. We found that 14% of apps mentioned school usage. So at first I thought, only 14% of the apps mentioned school usage. And then I thought, 14% of the apps mentioned school usage. So I don't really know how to interpret this slide, but I think there is going to be a growing market for apps for institutional markets. And there's a call-out box in the paper that talks about this and talks about an organization called BrainPop. I don't know if any of them are here, and their entryway into the app market. And if I were a developer, I would definitely be paying attention to institutional market as well as informal learning markets and game markets. And what's neat about these devices is they can really bridge that gap. And for so long, there's been such a huge gap between what happens when kids enter the school and what happens when they leave. And I think that there's a great opportunity here to bridge this gap. And we can talk about it after, but I could even name a few examples of apps that seem to be living in both worlds, which hasn't really happened in media before. So it's very exciting. So another thing that we tagged for was branding. So what this means was we looked for apps that were based on a popular mainstream branded character from another medium. So was there Dora, was there Elmo, was there somebody that kids would know about? So even if a developer had branding within their app that they created themselves, that was not tagged as branded, even though it would be branded, but it's a little bit confusing. But what we found was actually shocking, which was that only 2 of the iPhone apps and none of the iPad apps were based on branded characters. This was my personal biggest surprise from doing this analysis. And so we thought, what's going on here? Where are all the branded kids apps? So if you look, and remember, we were looking at the education category of the game section. If you look at education category of iTunes. If you look at the games category, and this is just a quick glance at the top 12 apps on a given day, you can see that half of them were based on popular mainstream branded characters. So I did interview a few people for the report around this issue of licensing and branding in an app world. And again, this is all really falling out. But I think that there is a great opportunity for independent developers to partner with mainstream, content providers. So why can't a Toontastic or a Motion Math partner with a Sesame or Disney and help solve this discovery problem that so many app developers have, which is how do people find me on the App Store? And that can help bring them in. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And one last quick thing, within the sample of 200 apps, 109 publishers were represented. 7 publishers had 5 or more apps. and 89 publishers were not represented in our 2009 sample. So if you just compare these numbers to something that you would see at in the video game industry or in the toy industry, this shows the low barriers of entry to this market. It shows the staggering uniqueness of this market as compared to other elements of the kids' digital media world. And this is pretty exciting for people looking to jump in here. So the report also includes some expert interviews that probe some of the issues that I've talked about, ranging from discovery and sustainability to the institutional market, efficacy, the research that's needed, and it also includes some recommendations for developers and policymakers and academia. And we're releasing it this afternoon, so we're really excited. And I think I'm out of time. So thanks very much.
Thanks to both speakers for giving a real headlong rush through their research so that we would have time for your questions. I want to come to you just as soon as possible, but I really want to make sure that we get right back to this question of sustainability, because we're hearing in the Communispace study that tech fast-forward parents in particular, tech-forward parents, are really eager for this. They want the content out there, but at $1.99, certainly at 99 cents, we're hearing very few stories of sustainability for children's educational media in particular, but children's media apps in general. Are you hearing anything, Manila, in the study that suggests a way forward so that we can be honest with parents about what we're offering them? I mean, yes, you could probably get them to pay more if you said this is going to get your kid to Harvard, but it wouldn't necessarily be honest. How do we get to honesty and sustainability?
I mean, I think that the question of transparency and honesty goes a little bit beyond the study, but it goes very much in line with sort of the work I've done over the years, looking at sort of what people want, engaging online in general. I think that if you're talking about a price point and that sort of thing, I think that the tech fast-forward parents didn't just see it as a linear thing like, oh, if they use this, they're going to get into Harvard. I think they saw it as enriching so many facets of their life and simplifying many ways of their life as well. So I think that the more developers and marketers can link the benefits and sort of like the enrichment potential and the empowerment potential of these different things. I don't know if price isn't always going to be a barrier. It's not necessarily a barrier. Especially, we did one activity that I actually didn't talk about, which is what would you invest, like if you had to like invest in your kids and where would you put that money? And it was like education over and over again. So, I mean, people do not want to scrimp on that. And so if you can articulate that and be transparent about it, I'm not sure, from what I'm hearing, that price is necessarily a huge object.
And Carla, you mentioned that there are different pricing models and that I know this study was not aimed at that, but in other work of the Cooney Center, have you found what effective models are, what sustainable models are?
Well, it's a good question, and I actually don't think that there's necessarily one answer to that. I think that if you look at an industry like, for instance, the toy industry, you can buy Play-Doh, where I might buy a lot of different, inexpensive play sets and then might buy one big play set, or you can buy one really expensive toy, or you can buy, a bunch of cheap playing cards, but when you add them all up, you have a robust play experience, but you also have spent a lot of money on them. And I think what we're trying to wrap our heads around here is a fair price value proposition. And it's not really happening right now because this market emerged so quickly and the 99-cent price point was so prevalent at the beginning that I think there is an expectation from parents and consumers in general that an app might be 99 cents, but the value that you're getting for that isn't really, it's so much more than that. And I mean, yes, you've already purchased an expensive device, but so if you look at something like content expansion packs, where maybe I can try out something for 99 cents or $1.99, but then I can, if my child likes this app, I can buy more. And so there's so many unique opportunities that the app market in particular offers in terms of content updates and expanding your play experience. But there needs to be a fair price value proposition, and I think that's still being worked on.
And I would urge you all, before you start setting pricing and strategies, to read some of what Warren Buckleitner has written about in-app purchases and the inherent problems that you can get into with kids regarding that. Are there questions out in the audience? Oh, lots of them.
Talk loud, please.
Question for Carly. On your slide about the difference between branded and non-branded, your example came up with Learning ABC Sesame, which was within a Play app. How do you determine what's a play app and what's an educational app?
Well, that's a good question. So this was based on developer assigns the category within iTunes. So the developer in that case chose to put it in the game section rather than in the education section. And you just touched on one of the key points of the report, which is that the games market is so much bigger that I think parents often default to that section, and developers of, especially those who might have a mainstream brand, default to the game section. And there's so much fantastic content in the education section, but it's a smaller market. So that's why I think that partnerships can be, will hopefully be really important over the next year or so.
Indeed.
The research is excellent, and I think the first study talked a lot about attitudes and the way people are perceiving these kinds of changes, and the second one was focused more on what we're actually seeing in the marketplace. There's a lot of discussion about attitudes, about parents being more optimistic or families being more optimistic about the interaction. As you took a look at those applications that were leading ones, how many of them had interactivity between parents and children?
That's a good question. So again, this was an analysis of how they marketed. So we did tag for whether they mentioned any intergenerational interaction or any, use this with your kids or use this with your parents. Unfortunately, that was a very hard one to code for, and we had this coded by 2 people to ensure reliability, and the reliability just wasn't high enough on that one to really report on it. But anecdotally, I can say that there weren't that many that promoted intergenerational interaction, and I'm so glad David touched on this point, the idea of the pass-back effect. I wish that term had never existed, because these devices offer a really, and while I was excited to see this panel with all these kids' tablets, I love that kids and parents are playing on the same device. I mean, that to me is magic. So it's a good question.
Manila, did that come up? I know you talked a little about parents want to be friends with their kids. They want to share these experiences.
Not in terms of specific applications. I think certain devices, like the obvious one, like the Wii and other things that you can do. And I think they talked about, it was more like the social stuff around the device. So you can take around like streaming content, for example. That's a negotiated thing between kids and parents, and sort of what we're going to watch as a family, what you're going to watch because it relates to a homework assignment. And sort of the parents were really engaged in sort of helping figure that out. So they don't pass that back and forth. That's not an app necessarily, but it is a means of connecting people, and it is the social behavior around it is a shared behavior.
Oh, there we go.
Aline Stein. I'm interested in this question of why you changed the name and some opinion on that. A screen is not a screen is not a screen. What do each of you think that means? I mean, why was it changed, and what do you think? You want to say.
To be fair to them,
that?
I made the choice to change the title. They didn't make the title, but I think it comes out in what they're saying.
I think that the screen. I think that for me it means that the overarching sort of contextual stuff around technology and these devices is more important than the device itself. I think that that's actually driving a lot of it. I mean, I think technology enables it, but I think the behaviors have their own momentum. And so whether it's whether it's like a split screen or it's like you've got the device. I forget, it's a Disney thing. It's like the second screen where you've got the younger kid looking at the same movie as that's on the television set, but it's got educational stuff because they're a little like less distracted. I think that there's so many ways that people pull in, or you're researching something on your iPad while you're watching television. I mean, I think that the screens are sort of they're not just one screen, and I don't think they're as meaningful as sort of the actual activities that people are doing on them. And I think the hardware is just going to keep evolving, obviously, for me.
Yeah, and I think one thing that our study highlights, when you look at the publisher, the information about publishers was actually really interesting when we see that there are 109 publishers represented, and that 89 of them were not there 2 years ago, or not represented within the top 200 paid apps in this section of iTunes. That shows just the difference between this market and other markets, and the different dynamics that are at play. And so, a screen is not a screen is not a screen.
And as the person who made the change, it's something I speak about a lot, because I think we too often read research that comes out that talks about children and screen time generically, as though they're doing the same thing when they're sitting in front of the television that they're doing when they're playing, playing with a Kinect, as they're doing when they're researching something. It's not just about the amount of time spent with screens.
Hi, my question is for Carly. I'm Dave Hodgson. I'm a Chief Technology Officer for a software development company. Would you speculate on the differences you might see between the Android market and the iTunes market? That's kind of part A. And part B, did you come across any growth in apps spanning across media? So a story I might watch on TV, continue the story on the app, or the app pushing you back into TV, or across multimedia?
Those are both really good questions, and I would have to speak. My opinion on the Android market, which is completely anecdotal, is that you would see extremely significant differences in quality, and I think right now that you'd be seeing a very different, in many cases, a different class of app available on the Android systems in general. Big generalization, big point that's anecdotal. And your second question, that's also a good question. We did not code for that. I've been seeing a little bit more of that, but not as much as I think there is the potential for.
We are getting the flashing green light here, so I think I need to wrap it up. And both of them will be available for questions afterwards. But I do want to urge, if you haven't read Lisa Guernsey's book, which was issued originally as Into the Minds of Babes and is being reissued now as Screen Time, it's a really thoughtful look into exactly the kinds of things that you've been hearing from both these panelists. There are three factors here. There's the content, what kinds of things kids are spending time with. There's the context, where, how, and especially why. And there's the individual child, understanding that. There's also, I think, an inherent relationship between those of us who are creating content for kids and those parents to establish a dialogue. And I think what Manila's research has shown us is that the parents are eager for that dialogue. They really are optimistic about the world that's out there, but they have a lot to share about their opinions, about their desires. So I urge you all to get out there and look at or explore that relationship, build that relationship with parents. Thank you much.
Thank you, guys.